you very much. The next speaker is Professor Dragana Mitrovic from the University of Belgrade.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I could still say good morning. I would very much like to thank Pagio and the European Forum for Belt and Road Cooperation for inviting me here today to talk to you about the issue that is very much an interesting one, not only for the countries involved, but also for many other countries, for Brussels, for many institutions and much bigger frameworks. But let us start with, I named it, as you could read, 16+1 Framework of Cooperation 6 years after. Because in 2011, the announcement of this framework of cooperation was done in Budapest. And although the first Prime Ministers' Summit was officially, of course, held next year in 2012 in Warsaw, and it was initiated by, at that time, Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao. And we could see the following summits. In 2013, one was held in Bucharest, in 2014 in Belgrade, in my country, in Serbia. Then in 2015 in Suzhou, in China, was the next one. And last year's one was in Riga. And through all these summits and years passing by, we could see one framework framing itself, filling up with content, developing, deepening, and it was one more, we could say, experiment, like the usual way of China was doing its reform and opening up policy, including the foreign elements of it. Because when it was launched, it was sort of a surprise, we could say, even for the countries involved. I will go back for those 12 measures. Maybe that would be interesting. But anyway, I will say that when it was set up, it was also the element of surprise among the 16th. How did China and Chinese Prime Minister came with these 16 countries? Because at that time, most of them were EU member states. Some of them were not and still are not. At this point, 11 of those countries are EU member states, 5 are not, including my country. Well, we could say that all of them, they used to be socialist countries. And this is one thing that they for sure have in common. Other things we could not really, we can say, because there are some similarities among few of them, but then they differ from another group. Like there is a significant number of like Slavic countries, but others are not Slavic. Some others are like Central Europeans, but others are Southeastern Europeans when it comes to geography, etc., etc. So it was a sort of a surprise, but all of the 16 decided for sure to go on and see what was going to happen and to see what was this Chinese initiative, a platform for future cooperation was going to offer to them. For that, I will go back to those 12 measures that Prime Minister Wen announced in Warsaw. And those 12 measures are also very interesting to be seen of what and how many of them and to what extent they were really fulfilled or developed or realized. So the first one was to set secretariat. You could see it was done in Beijing within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And national coordinators were decided in a different manner in all the 16 countries. The special credit line, we will come back to this one many times, because to use those preferential funds of $10 billion, like 30%, that at that time was meant 3% loan given by one of the policy banks of China, but guaranteed by the sovereign guarantees given by the recipient states, were not possible even at that moment, because the Brussels forbid that sort of financial settlement for its member states in 2011. So there were actually only 5 of the 16 that were eligible to use the funds. When it comes to, and because of the negative interest rate among many big world creditors, 3% became at the point it was like for preferential loans for third world countries, but it became too expensive. Only a few years afterwards, because of these negative interest rates among the biggest credit markets and in some of the biggest investors. Also, the setting up, Prime Minister Wen announced setting up of the Investment Cooperation Fund exclusively devoted to the development of infrastructure, different sort of infrastructure in those countries. And the first stage was to fill it with $500 million. Also, money coming from two of the policy banks, Chinese policy banks. The goal was set up to upgrade the trade between 16 and China to $100 billion in 2015. And actually the trade was developing and surging by 30%, but we will see how, and was it mutually beneficial, as the whole platform initiative was announced to be another win-win initiative and framework of cooperation. China, it was said that China will set up economic or technology high-tech zone, something similar to special economic zones of China, in each of the 16 countries. Nothing is happening. Yes. Then financial cooperation was to be developed, and we heard today of some elements, and actually the Hungarian path that was among the most, if not the most successful one with China. Although Poland, as we will say later, was one of the founders of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Expert Advisory Committee on the Construction and Transportation Network, and especially a network that would somehow reconnect those countries. And it does not exist, because I was complaining to organizers that I was traveling with minibus for 8 hours yesterday, and there is only 350 kilometers between Belgrade and Budapest. But not only because of me, but many people would use it, and for economic purposes, of course. Forum on Cultural Cooperation, then 5,000 scholarships within this framework of time, tourism promotion, establish a research fund on relations, and all of us devoted to China studies probably ask ourselves many times, what is the way to get access to those funds, how we can do it, how it is operationalized. We realize there are some funds, and within Hanban and some other institutions, but it wasn't so far that known. Young political leaders forums. It was said to be organized, and the first one was organized in 2000, next year actually. So these were the 12 measures. I mentioned that 11 and 5, that first division. For European Union, for the Brussels institution, it was sort of surprise. What was China doing now, like in Europe, with some of the 11 of our member states, and with those 5 states that want to become member states and should actually follow unconditionally all these accession paths on different levels that we demand from them. What is China doing? Like some people thought, and some analysts saw it as a geopolitical threat, saying, well, China is actually building the wall just in the middle of European Union, just dividing our union and China. We're not very happy about it. But on the other hand, and as we heard this morning, in 2008, there was the outbreak of the global financial crisis that turned into a global economic crisis, and China was very much invited as investor and even a saver. And China was invited to purchase those bonds and even Chinese access to real economy of the most developed EU economies was much easier because the assets became cheaper and the geopolitical consideration just decreased in front of the economic need. So China was a welcomed investor, but still not a very loved one. Some analysts explained that China wanted to develop economic cooperation with these 16 countries because it wanted to open another door towards the European Union, because some of them were member states, some others were to become. So China wanted to be more important in this region and to set up something different than Brussels was capable. Why? Because the so-called the New Europe, the new member states were in many ways disappointed with the European Union's ability to deal with the global economic crisis. There was a crisis of values also. There was a big disappointment of the population of the European Union with their relevant governments and who were they serving, to some financial oligarchy behind the scenes or to their own citizens, and whose interests were they representing. So there was a lot of issues trembling in Brussels and along the European Union, and there was an obvious division between the most developed countries and those lagging behind, and a lot of accusations towards each other, whose responsibility was that development of the situation, etc., etc. So the answers came too slowly and not too adequately, and that was the moment where China stepped in, and also the markets of the most developed EU member economies subtly was more and more shut towards the goods coming from the new member states, and also the credit crunch was obvious in the new member states because the banks who actually came from the Western financial capitals withdraw the money to the capitals, and the Eastern and Central European member states were left just without enough financial resources. But they all needed it to upgrade their infrastructure that was backwarded, or to technologically upgrade the abilities of their economies to expand. They needed more working places, etc., etc. You have some countries that, even becoming a member state, lost several millions of educated people, like Romania, who immigrated to Western EU countries. So those problems were hugely economic, social, political to all the leaders of those countries. When we talk about politics, maybe the era of Havelism passed away in Central and some of the Central EU member states, Central European, sorry. And a more nationalistic government came that were more concerned about national economic concerns. And they discovered China as a promising investor, just okay political partner. Somebody and entity that was offering what was needed, financial injections, some sort of past history of doing business, because at the beginning of its reform and opening up, China was relying a lot on former socialist European countries for technology, for experiences with international financial organizations, etc., etc. And those connections were rediscovered in both directions. That is what we were talking about. I don't like presentations for this reason. Everybody is looking at them, and I'm also having to look at them instead of talking to you. But nevertheless, I please the organizers a bit. What were the Chinese interests? Obviously, China wanted to strengthen its presence in Europe. On economic terms, political terms, cultural terms, even geopolitical terms. It comes as the last one, but it comes as a result of the previously mentioned. China wanted to multiply and to strengthen its presence. Economic gains, yes, we will talk about it later. We heard that China is the biggest trade nation in the world, yes. It means that it's in China's dearest interest to encourage trade and to fight against trade barriers. So every other market, no matter how small, how growing or just in promise, it's valuable for China. Building is very important because you employ working force, you employ corporations, you employ labor surplus, you employ your products, and if you build in other countries, you import from China, you install Chinese technology, you employ Chinese corporations, and it's a good business deal for China. It's a great business deal, just building. It's not concern of investor, is it profitable or not? Is it going to be useful for your country in 20 years or 30 or 100? Their job is just to get financially well and to employ all those resources. Investing, yes. But China has invested in, it was a record one. In 2015, it invested 34 billion euros in the most developed European Union countries. At the same year, it invested only 1.8 billion in those 16. The trade developed, yes, 30 years by year. And I will just give you those figures. Between 2004 and 2009, the growth of trade was between China and 16th, 100 billion US dollars. Between 2010 to 2015, it was 160 billion. Actually, sorry, but the total, so the trade really developed, but the total deficit accumulated in these 16 countries between 2004 and 2015 was $260 billion trade deficit by those countries. So trade grew, but trade deficit on the side of the 16th grew also. Also, when China often speaks about investments, that is about trade, but it's a huge problem. And we cannot talk about a win-win situation unless this problem is dealt seriously. Recently, China promised to open its specific markets for the products from those countries, like agriculture and some other. But those production in most of those countries is so weak for different reasons, is such that we need, those 16 countries need much more serious and consistent Chinese investment in building production, in starting, expanding, upgrading production, so that those countries could in the future be able to export more to China. We also need more Chinese tourists. We also need a few services to be opened to our countries if we want to really make it win-win cooperation. When it comes to foreign investment, I said we really need much more substantial and bigger in value Chinese direct investments, because loans given to specific projects, like there are great examples, like bridge on Danube in Belgrade, built by Chinese corporation, the first one in Europe built by Chinese corporation, but it was financed 85% by Exim Bank, given sovereign guarantee for Serbian government. Chinese corporation was designed to assigned to build that road, and we will pay back every penny, of course. And we had a Chinese corporation imported all the equipment, materials built in, etc., etc. So it created market for the future. But this is not investments. These are loans designated to certain specific jobs, to specific companies, and it creates a lot of problems with Brussels, because it's against EU regulations about free market and how to do business in free market. Let me just say that if we want to transform this wonderful platform of cooperation that also adds cultural cooperation, people to people, getting to know each other better, working for the future world, as President Xi Jinping, when visited Serbia last year, said, we are called to build a common destiny together, which is for the first time offered to the Central and Eastern Europe nations by China, then we should really work hard to turn it into real win-win cooperation, when our side, our 16 different countries with different interests and need, will gain and see much more obvious benefits for our sides, because it's job of our government to take care of our national and relevant interests. Thank you very much.